Football fans around the world have their eyes on Qatar, where the World Cup has started, with the host nation losing its first match on Sunday. The tournament is highly controversial and expensive. The costs have already exceeded $200 billion and could go even higher. The scale of Qatar's investment is unparalleled. Previously, the most expensive World Cups were the 2014 tournament in Brazil and Russia in 2018, which both cost less than $15 billion. The 2006 World Cup in Germany cost just $4.3 billion. Why the high cost? Well, infrastructure doesn't come cheap. That includes new stadiums at a cost of $6.5 billion. 7 of the 8 World Cup venues have been built from scratch. Then there's non-football infrastructure. Qatar built a new metro system, an international airport, roads, hotels, and leisure amenities. Much of it is part of the Gulf state's wider public investment project known as Qatar National Vision 2030. I'm joined by Dan Plumley. He specializes in sport finance at Sheffield Hallam University. Welcome, Dan. First of all, can you tell us, why has this World Cup turned out so much more expensive than previous iterations?
Yeah, I think it was always going to be. We've seen kind of the bar's been raised higher and higher, and Russia was no different to that. So I think we were expecting this, but it's kind of very much off the scale there as well in terms of the gap. So a lot of it is due to the infrastructure costs. To be honest, it's the facilities weren't there in Qatar where they've been in other countries in the past. So a lot of the money that we've seen has actually gone into longer term infrastructure projects, which was building stadiums and transport links. So that's where a lot of the cost is going.
Now, sports tournaments are notorious, of course, for creating white elephants. We know that. Do you think these are wise investments on Qatar's part?
I think there's always that danger. And again, we've seen that in some footballing nations that have been, more advanced than Qatar in the past. We've had issues with Brazil and South Africa. So it is a risk, and it's always a risk with any major sporting event. I think some of the things that Qatar have tried to do are trying to be a little bit innovative. So that, there's a stadium that's built from shipping containers that can be taken down and then reconstructed elsewhere. But you always run the risk with a major sporting tournament that your stadiums are left unused when everyone's gone home. And I think that will still be a risk for Qatar, especially given that their domestic league system is not as advanced as other countries yet. So, yeah, it will be a problem, but it's a problem with every sporting event as well.
Now, this has all come, of course, at a terrible human cost, as we've been saying. What has the impact of documented abuses against migrant workers been on the conduct of this World Cup?
I think it's always been there in the background, hasn't it? And we're talking about this, we've been talking about these issues for 12 years now. But we are here, we are at the World Cup, and FIFA makes the ultimate decision on who hosts that tournament. So we have to go back right to the very start of this decision-making process. And we were always going to see the biggest cost in terms of a World Cup here financially, and there's been other issues as well that have detrimented the tournament in the build-up to it. But I think again, this was bigger than the World Cup as well. It wasn't just about hosting the tournament for Qatar; it was about a number of other reasons as well.
We've seen calls, because of these human rights abuses and the corruption allegations, of course, to boycott the World Cup, whether it's venues not showing the games or fans themselves choosing not to watch. Do you think that's made any kind of difference?
I think to the individual and for causes collectively, it will feel like it's made a difference. But I think, also the other side of that is that, of course, the tournament is still taking place and people have made those individual decisions and we have to respect those individual decisions. But, the World Cup will happen and we will, deal with the legacy of that for years to come. And it's really tricky because not one person can't just solve the problem. It has to be a collective. But you have to respect individual choices and decision making, of course, with regards to this.
Has FIFA done enough?
I think the question of FIFA is always the interesting one because, as I've said before, it is their decision ultimately in terms of who hosts the tournament. It's their decision financially. It's their decision in terms of the sponsors that they work with and the commercial packages that they've got in place. One thing that is always clear with FIFA is that their revenue and their whole business model is geared around the World Cup. They make losses in the years where there's not a World Cup on, and they turn a profit when there is a World Cup on. So huge financial pressures that go within this model, and all of this collides, and there's much bigger picture stuff, of course, but it's FIFA's decision ultimately, and whether or not they've done enough is, people will differ on their opinions of that, but ultimately it's their call in terms of who hosts the tournament, and they own the rights to that.
So they've obviously made this decision with Qatar, but this might go beyond the World Cup. Do you have a sense of how much Qatar has paid to build its influence in the footballing world beyond this tournament?
Yeah, I think we will see that progress over time as well. That the estimated costs of this tournament are around $220 billion. That's the highest figure we've seen. That's rose from a cost of around $65 billion when the deal was signed. So we've seen that money, go into this tournament so far. We've seen wider expansion of Qatar into the football world, and also, other outlets in the Middle East across other sports as well, not just football. And I think we will see that continue into the future, and that will cost a significant amount of money. But we know that financial resources, is not really an option here. It's not as much of a problem. It's about other factors and leveraging those countries in using sport as a driver for that.
Thank you, Dan Plumley. He teaches sports finance at Sheffield Hallam University. Thanks for your insights.